A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. As you may well be aware, in India, spokespersons of the BJP party in India, they made disrespectful comments and derogatory remarks about the holy personage of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Hazrat Aisha Siddiqah radhiyallahu anha. This issue keeps on coming up, and of course they make a mockery of the riwayah quoted in Bukhari that she was 6 at the time of nikah and 9 at the time of marriage. Frankly, I personally never accepted this from my childhood, and I have ever since been inquiring. Some 40 years ago, a learned scholar, an alim, came from India, and I put the question to him. So he said, well, in the Bukhari it's quoted 6 and 9. So I asked him that, good sir, would you marry a girl of 6? He kept quiet. Then I said to him that, would you marry your daughter at the age of 6? Again he kept quiet. So I said to him, why should the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, leave an example that learned scholars like you cannot follow? Again, no answer. So later on, I continued my research, and it was some 40 years ago that first booklet was published from IPCI, proving that she was not 6 but 16 at the time of nikah and 19 at the time of marriage. The book was published, and of course, as always, there were a lot of calls from learned ulmas and scholars. Oh, you are going against Bukhari. I said, no, I'm not going against Bukhari. I'm going against the interpretation of Bukhari. So now, we have now this latest edition of this booklet, True Age of Hazrat Aisha Siddiqah radhiyallahu anha at the time of her marriage. And going into the background, we know, don't we, that in the 10th year of the prophethood in Mecca, Hazrat Abu Talib died. Few months later, Hazrat Khadija radhiyallahu anha also passed away. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, was under considerable pressure. He had lost the protection of Abu Talib, and he had lost the beloved companion in Hazrat Khadija radhiyallahu anha. So he had to look after the family affairs, the household, and of course the pressure of doing dawah and the other outside activities. So how did it come about? Hazrat Qawla radhiyallahu anha, a close relative of the Prophet, peace be upon him, she approached him and said, Ya Rasulullah, I see that you are under extreme pressure these days. And therefore, because you have the responsibility and commitment of the household and children, and also the outside commitments and pressure that you have, so I suggest, Ya Rasulullah, that you get married. So he replied, peace be upon him, that do you have anyone in mind? And she suggested, yes, there are 2. And first she mentioned a bikr. A bikr is a lady who is mentally and physically matured, but is unmarried virgin. And that was Hazrat Aisha Siddiqah radhiyallahu anha. And then she also mentioned a sayyaba, who was Hazrat Sauda radiallahu anha, who had accepted Islam and who was a widow in her early 50s. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, agreed, and he said, okay, approach and find out. Now the point here, which I've included in this booklet here, and I've had some very positive comments about it, is that under those circumstances, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, has responsibilities of children and family and household and outside activities, and Hazrat Khawla, no doubt she was a sane, matured person, a well-wisher of the Prophet, peace be upon him, suggesting that he should marry so that a matured lady can look after the children and the household, so that he would be relieved from at least the household commitments and pressure. So would she then, in her right mind, suggest a young girl of 6 years of age who would herself need care and attention? Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So obviously not. So we gathered together that she obviously was suggesting a lady who was mentally and physically matured and who could look after children so as to relieve the Prophet, peace be upon him, from his responsibilities and pressure in the household. And this is what happened. And so she approached Hazrat Khawla radiallahu anhu, approached Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, and made a proposal. So he said, you see, Aisha has been engaged to Jubair bin Mut'im for some years. Now the thing is, if she was 6 years of age, how could she have been engaged to Jubair bin Mut'im for several years? How? Maybe before she was born? So it doesn't make sense. So he replied that now that we have accepted Islam and they haven't, so they may well be reluctant to marry in their household because they may think that Jubair may accept Islam because of us. But I will approach them and find out and let you know. So anyway, Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he approached, and as he expected, Mut'im replied that, look, we are no longer interested because you have now become kafir, you have left our deen, and therefore we are not interested. And so Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he approached now Hazrat Khawla and said that they have refused to make any further progress, and therefore we are ready to marry Hazrat Aisha to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. But of course, by that time Hazrat Sauda was already married to him and was in his household. So Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he was a friend and because it was considered somewhat degrading to refuse a proposal in circumstances like that, he accepted. Now the point is that why 6 and 9 is mentioned in Bukhari. So first of all, we have to bear in mind that in Bukhari there are hadith and riwayas, and this is a riwayah, it's not a hadith. And if we look at the Laylatul Qadr, we know that it was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him, but it was taken away from him because there were two Muslims quarreling. So he said then, when it was taken away, فَلْتَمْسُوهَا فِي السَّبْعِ وَالتِّسْعِ وَالْخَمْسَةِ. Search it now in 7th, 9th, or the 5th. Now, it doesn't say 25th or 27th or 29th. It says 7th, 9th, or 5th. So where does the 27th and 29th and the 25th come from? Because it should have been Sabashrun, Tisashrun, or Khamsashrun. But because it's understood that it occurs in the last Ashra of the month of Ramadan, therefore it hasn't been mentioned. And in classical Arabic, if something is well known, then it is not repeated. And that's why when we read this riwayah in Bukhari, 6 and 9, Ashara is understood. And it is, as it is understood and well known, it is not mentioned. Well, it's a vast topic and demands time to continue. It's a 1 hour speech, but we'll end it here. And what I would ask you to do is to familiarize yourself with this commitment. And having said that, when the circumstances were mentioned at the time, that how it came about, I must say the scholars approached me and they said that why is it that this point hasn't come to our minds? You know that under those circumstances, it would have been unthinkable to propose to the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, the rishta or proposal of a girl who is only 6 years of age. They agreed with that. And many of them then agreed with the work that I had done. And in fact, I received some inquiries from India because, as you know, there are some crises going on in India. All the OIC countries are against India because of the statements that have been made, derogatory and disrespectful remarks that have been made against the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and Hazrat Aisha Siddiqah radiallahu anhu. So please take this booklet, familiarize yourself with this approach, so that if this ever occurs to you, you'll be ready to answer it. We'll continue inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Brothers and sisters, I mentioned earlier that the 2 spokespersons of BJ part in India made derogatory and disrespectful comments about the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Hazrat Aisha Siddiqah radiallahu anha. And I mentioned to you to take this booklet with you. It's waiting for you. It's free. Hazrat Aisha Siddiqah radiallahu anha, which proves that at the time of nikah she was 16 and at the time of marriage she was 19. The other point this woman made was that the stories are myths, and she said this mentioned in the Holy Quran that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, he went on ascension to heavens riding on a horse which had wings. She said it's mentioned in the Quran, and of course it's not mentioned in the Quran. But there are riwayas which we read in the Hadith in Muslim that there was a beast, white beast, not as small as a donkey and not as big as a horse, and it was named Al-Burraq. So the point is that for the people to understand, if a means of transport was provided, what would that means of transport be? So the size is described, not necessarily that it was a horse, but the size is mentioned that this means of transport was not as small as a donkey and not as big as a horse. But the name itself indicates something that people in those days could not or would not have understood. For instance, Al-Burraq. Burraq is an intensive form of barq. Barq is an Arabic word which means lightning. So Burraq means, it indicates that it's travelled at the speed of light. Because we also read that its one stride was as far as the eye could see, again indicating that it travelled with the speed of light. Another indication is that the Holy Prophet went for a long time, but when he returned, we are told that the chain on the door was still swinging and the bed that he left was still warm. Because when one travels at a speed of light, then the earthly time becomes static. So this is something that you should know, and should this argument or this topic ever come, you should be prepared how to tackle it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.